A Russian peasant named Grigori Rasputin asserted that he possessed magical healing skills and even went so far as to assert that he was the second coming of Christ. He was a member of the Rasputin family. It was he who established his own cult and even managed to convince members of the Roman royal family that he was, in fact, a holy man. He exerted his influence on the Russian government once he had everyone under his control and had them all wrapped around his little finger. Owing to the fact that his choices were a contributing factor in the Romanov dynasty's demise for a number of years. He asserts that he fought a battle against the forces of good and evil throughout his life. That he was indeed the Antichrist was a belief held by a great number of priests who believed that his powers did not originate from God at all. In the year 1869, on January 20th, Grigori Rasputin was born in a village in Siberia that was known as Prokofiev's Great Venus. Siberia has been described as a dumping ground for Russia's criminals, and the region was home to a large number of prison colonies that were occupied by men who were forced to perform laborious tasks. There were also those there who had been of great assistance to Siberia due to their political or religious views. It is one of the coldest places on Earth, and it is also one of the most hardest places to survive. There is a never-ending battle going on. The father of Rasputin was a peasant farmer and a courier, and his mother had 7 children before he was born. Rasputin was the 7th child to be born to his mother. They all passed away either during childbirth or when they were very little. It would appear that he was the first person to make it through the severe winter in Siberia. When he was a young boy, he asserts that he occasionally had dreams in which angels appeared to him and that he would see visions of the future. He was able to know things about his neighbors that he had no way of knowing, which was sufficient evidence for the people to trust him. He had the ability to heal horses. The very act of touching them made him feel ill. Some of the villagers were under the impression that he was the second coming of Christ and that he was simply something that God had touched. One group of people held the belief that he was demonic and that he might be cooperating with the devil. Between the ages of 12 and 21, in light of the fact that he was reportedly very poorly behaved, it would appear that the latter claim is accurate. He was a drinker, he would steal, and in general, he would just get on everyone's nerves more than anything else. When he was 28 years old, he had already tied the knot and was a father to 4 children with his wife, whom he had met in a municipality nearby. His reputation was that he was an alcoholic who was aggressive, and he was also known to have cheated on his wife. A horse was taken from him one day. When news got out that he was a horse thief, rather than face the repercussions, he gallops towards the local monastery so that he might seek sanctuary there. He ended up staying with the Christian brothers for a number of months. They had been successful in persuading him to seek God and to change his wicked ways. It was a man named Mercury who served as his guide, and it was he who ultimately made the decision to join the order and become a monk. For the purpose of spreading the gospel to a number of different communities, he left his family behind and traveled from place to place. A significant number of historians are of the opinion that if he had spent such a significant amount of time trekking through the wilderness of Siberia, it was inevitable that he would come upon a cult known as the Christi. These individuals were a branch of the Russian Orthodox Church, and a significant number of their followers would actually attend a regular church on Sundays in order to attend clandestine gatherings in the woods. They held the belief that the only way to attain salvation was by completing the process of purifying sin, so that they may experience the effects of asphyxiation. They would undertake rituals in which they would choke one another and then release their grip at the very last second. Until they reached a state of intoxication, they would spin and dance while speaking in tongues. After working themselves into a frenzy, they would eventually surrender and fall to the ground. Afterwards, they would satisfy their repressed sexual urges by engaging in sexual activity with whoever was lying next to them. In addition, a gigantic orgy resolved never stop traveling and spreading the message of the Christian faith. But this was not your typical visit from someone who carries a Bible. It was something completely else. These monk wanderers were not permitted to bathe, and Rasputin would occasionally walk while wearing chains in order to intentionally cause himself to experience anguish throughout the day. With this, he was expected to make amends for the sins he had committed. He had undergone a complete transformation by the time he went back to his hometown to reunite with his family and friends. Despite the fact that he had just returned home, his eyes continued to shine with a terrifying intensity, and he reported that the visions he had received from God were more powerful than they had ever been. In order to continue having orgies with his close friends, he informed his wife that he needed to utilize the basement as a gathering place for his religious group. He also continued to conduct orgies with his personal pals. At some point in time, Rasputin asserts that he was visited by the Virgin Mary, who instructed him to travel to St. Petersburg in order to provide assistance to the royal family. There was no way that a peasant man in Siberia could possibly be of assistance to the royal family. This thought was completely absurd. So, it is a mystery to me how someone of Rasputin's stature could have managed to gain access to the royal palace. In any case, it was revealed that his teacher from the monastery Makary was in fact the one who had previously served as the Romanovs' religious counselor. It is highly probable that he was able to utilize Makwary's connections in order to recruit certain aristocratic clientele who had faith in Rasputin's capabilities, and many were just delighted by his abilities. The wealthy individuals were willing to come all the way to a little village in order to receive healing from him, just like they would hire him. Rasputin embarked on the arduous voyage to St. Petersburg after sending a letter for the purpose of introducing himself to one of his acquaintances who lived there. He came into contact with Bishop Hannigan, as well as a high-ranking priest by the name of Sergei Trifonov, who is more commonly referred to as Illy. The appearance of Rasputin, who was untidy, initially caused the men to be surprised. The odor that he exuded was extremely revolting, and his gaze was chilling. I was utterly terrified. He had the ability to donate his eyes whenever he wanted, giving the impression that they were almost completely dark. The priest, however, stated that he must be a saint who was gifted by the powers of God, but recipes, and that he truly did not care at all about what other people thought of him. This was after the priest witnessed his incredible healing skill. His nose would be picked, and he would eat it in front of those who were considered to be dignified. He would also mark aristocratic women for their hours. He truly became excellent friends with Princess Melissa Anastasia of Montenegro, who were known as the Crow Sisters due to the form of their nostrils. Crow Sisters were a moniker for the Crow Sisters. Despite the fact that they were not Russian, they were able to marry into a Roman family that had both been deeply immersed in mysticism and the occult when they were younger. In light of the fact that both of them are able to manipulate their way into marrying members of the royal family, due to the fact that they were sometimes seen to be social outsiders by the rest of the nobility, they formed a bond with Rasputin and took him under their wing. It couldn't have come at a different time. A doctor named Dr. Philip, who served as his Tsarina Alexandra, Romanov's first spiritual advisor, has recently passed away with her passing. She was under the impression that he assisted her and Nicholas, the Tsar, in having a male and successor to the throne, as they had previously only had daughters. The Crow Sisters presented Rasputin to the Siren Tsarina at a party. He says on his deathbed that she would meet another holy man very soon who would take his place. This occurred practically immediately after the Crow Sisters introduced Rasputin to the Siren. A prior mystic was located with the assistance of the sisters, who were the ones that assisted the Tsarina. Therefore, when Alexandra became aware of the tales that Rasputin possessed magical healing talents, she was aware that she desired for him to assist us in handling elections. His condition, hemophilia, which prevents blood from clotting, was present from birth. He was born with this ailment. This indicates that even a minor cut or scrape can result in a significant amount of blood loss. It was a secret that they informed Rasputin about their son's illness at the party, and they never disclosed it to him. They made an effort to maintain their silence. there was still some uncertainty in Alexandra's mind over whether or not she could put her faith in this Siberian shepherd. However, on a certain day, Alexei became ill and scraped his knee. The bleeding continued unabated, and Rasputin suddenly appeared at the royal palace and demanded to see the youngster. He stated that he received a vision from God and that the prince would perish if he did not come into his presence. In point of fact, it is highly probable that he obtained this exclusive information from the Crow sisters, but the gods who were a part of the royal family were taken aback, and they pondered the question of how he could have possibly known after he was granted permission to meet him. He instructed the medical professionals to leave so that he could make use of his abilities to heal. Alexei did, in fact, start to recover almost soon after the injury. This was sufficient evidence to persuade Alexandra that he was, in fact, a holy man who possessed the ability to cure through magical means. Scientists and historians of the modern era feel that this was not magic, surprise, surprise, but rather that he was actually blocking the physicians from feeding Alexei aspirin, which would cause his blood to become thinner and would only make his hemophilia worse. At a short period of time, Rasputin established himself as a consistent presence at the home that belonged to the Romanov family. He started administering substances such as opium, morphine, and cocaine to the celebrity, believing that these substances would assist him in dealing with his different maladies. It was common for them to get high together on a regular basis. The Tsar developed an addiction, which only served to increase his desire for Rasputin to visit the palace on a more regular basis. Rasputin was able to alleviate the Tsarina's discomfort and help her relax. The Tsarina suffered from anxiety and migraine headaches, and Rasputin did his best to alleviate her suffering. At some point in time, the Tsar and the Tsarina started to experience feelings of dependence on him, and he began to pay them visits on a weekly basis at the very least. The call came from Rasputin to Alexandra and Nicholas. She and Papa treated him as if he were one of the children. It was at night that he started praying with the children and telling them stories before they went to bed. Because of this, the nanny experienced a great deal of anxiety because the eldest daughters had already started going through the process of puberty. In addition, one of the servants asserts that Rasputin had sexually assaulted her. Despite this, the Tsarina had such a high level of faith in Rasputin that she accused the maid of lying and fired her. She then proceeded to attempt to expel Rasputin from the nursery facility. However, the children assert that Rasputin was their friend, and they also complained that the nanny was so cruel that she was terminated from her position, in spite of the fact that Rasputin's influence extended far within the royal family. It was evident that he was able to get away with virtually anything. Newspapers all around Petersburg started publishing articles about the occurrence, claiming that Rasputin was practically led into the princesses' beds. These articles were published in newspapers. Rasputin resided in an apartment in St. Petersburg, which was accessible to his followers and provided them with the opportunity to meet with him. Moreover, women were also there with a hot food, and they held gatherings in the style of a potluck. Those individuals gathered around a table, with him occupying the central position. Sometimes Rasputin would be sitting in silence, staring off into the distance, and then all of a sudden he would start mumbling something. Immediately, the women would stop talking in the hopes of comprehending what he was attempting to convey during their conversation. After that, he would grab a piece of paper and frantically jot down whatever was going through his mind for some reason that was completely bizarre and unfathomable. These men found this to be quite appealing, and because they felt that he was the second coming of Christ, they would volunteer to accompany him into his bedroom and have sexual relations with him. One disciple in particular, Olga, who was locked in, had such a strong confidence in him that she left her husband and children in order to move into his apartment. Olga was seen grasping his penis and yelling, "You are Christ and I am yours." She caused witnesses to open the rear door and pushed everyone to address him. She also persuaded witnesses to open the door. Additionally, have you ever been a witness to this sad event? When they found out about the scandal, they gradually retreated, closing the door behind them as they left. At the same time, the police officers were given the order to follow him in order to observe his posture. According to the information that they gathered, he would employ prostitutes on an almost daily basis and bring them into spa centers. Taking into consideration the fact that he would be paying for a bath on a regular basis, one may assume that he would have a pleasant odor. However, according to the testimonies, he would invite a prostitute into a secluded area where they would both disrobe together. After that, he would take his leather belt and begin beating the woman, claiming that he would beat the sin of lechery out of her. He would do this a number of times. Then, after having sexual relations with her, he would depart the bathhouse without even coming into contact with the water. There was a time when he was seen exiting a bathhouse while yelling at the demons that he could feel within himself. Sometimes he would declare that he could see the devil in himself, and he would also say that there was a conflict going on inside of him regarding his soul. Obviously, this may give the impression that he was making a mistake while under the influence of one of the many medicines that he was taking at the time. Remember, however, that these two priests, Bishop Hannigan and Alito, happened to hear about Rasputin yelling about demons in public. They were the ones who happened to hear about it. Moreover, this was detrimental to the prestige of the organization because they were the ones who presented Rasputin to the St. Petersburg Society audience. How Megan and Eleanor sneaked up on Rasputin in order to confront him about what he was doing without his knowledge. They said that he had obtained these healing skills through the assistance of the devil. How is it? As Megan grabbed Rasputin by the penis, she yelled out that he was thinking with his penis rather than his brain. The two individuals arrived with a massive wooden crucifix, which they proceeded to beat to a degree that was comparable to the gory beatings that he would inflict against those prostitutes in a bathhouse. But he was not compelled by the strength that Christ possessed. Rasputin spied on them and told the Tsarina that they were attempting to kill him again mentally. He said that they were trying to kill him again. Elliot then escaped to Finland while disguised as a woman so that no one would be able to track him down and find out where he was headed. Both of them were then thrown into exile. During the same time period, Rasputin made the decision that he required a break from the city and traveled to his residence in Siberia. Rasputin eventually admitted all of the circumstances in a biography, and it turned out that a door was actually trying to murder him. He also confessed to all of the details. He was very certain that Rasputin turned out to be the Antichrist. Therefore, in order to kill him, he hired a prostitute with a damaged face to say that. She had been subjected to such severe treatment at the hands of a past client that they had severed her nose from her face, leaving only a gaping hole in the door. They also told her the stories of how Rasputin had beaten and abused other adult entertainers. She went to his village and waited for him outside of his house. She arrived there. The message that Rasputin had received in the mail prompted him to leave the house. Because he needed to submit a response, he had to go to the post office. During that moment, he became aware of the women who were standing there and staring at him. He arrived at the conclusion that she appeared to be an ideal convert. As a result, he made his way over to her in order to lay hands on her and share the gospel with her. Once she was in close enough proximity to him, she proceeded to repeatedly stab him in the stomach. Because she was so determined to try to murder him, she even dug her hands into his stomach and pulled out his intestines. She was that determined to finish him off. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand took place on the very same day, and it was one of the numerous events that eventually led to the outbreak of World War I. Rasputin was unable to be with the Tsar and Tsarina to provide him with advice since he was confined to a hospital in Siberia, where he was recovering from his injuries. Following the dissemination of the news that the Great War was about to break out, Rasputin penned a letter to the Tsar, urging him to refrain from going to war. "We will all drown in blood," he stated in his letter. "The catastrophe is enormous, and the suffering is unending." However, Rasputin was not something that the soul desired to hear. It was the first time in his career that people were cheering for him in the streets, and they were supporting him and fighting for the honor of Russia. It was necessary for the Tsar to leave the royal residence in order to engage in combat with the Russian army. While Alexandra was by herself, Rasputin returned to the royal palace, where he became a right-hand advisor and saw by proxy. This occurred after Rasputin had recovered from his illness. Over the course of 2 years, Rasputin himself appointed a number of ministers of the interior. However, because he lacked any political education whatsoever, the individuals he appointed to positions of authority were absolutely useless. The effects of World War I were severe. This conflict claimed the lives of millions of Russian men. At the same time as people were having trouble finding jobs, the price of bread almost doubled. When all of this was going on, the Tsarina put her faith in a psychopath. That entire nation, which had reached its limit, it was practically the only option available to the Russian people, and they decided to start a revolution. Rasputin's health began to deteriorate, and before long, he was no longer able to heal people, despite the fact that he had survived the attempts on his life. He wrote in his journal that he was aware that he would pass away in the near future, and that he had already come to terms with this fact. He was under the impression that God was preparing to deliver the Russian people from their predicament by offering a sacrifice. The manner in which Jesus Christ had died on the cross was comparable. Either Tsarina or Alexandra received a letter from him that stated, "If one of your relatives brings upon my death, and none of your family will remain alive for more than 2 years, then the Russian people will kill all of them. You should let your relatives know that I have already paid for them with my own veins. I am going to be put to death. I am no longer a member of the living beings. Remain steadfast and pray." In the course of a meeting in Parliament, one of the lawmakers literally referred to Rasputin as a dark force. He also stated that he was sick and tired of this filthy peasant dominating the country, and that he would personally kill Rasputin himself if the man was not removed from power. The Tsarina. A man by the name of Felix Yusupov was Alexandra's nephew, and he was one of the many individuals who desired for him to cease to exist. He had heard a great deal about Rasputin's stellar reputation among the ladies. Yusupov was married to a woman named Irina, who was regarded as one of the most physically attractive women in the city of St. Petersburg. Yusupov was a member of the Russian Federation. It was commonly known that Yusupov was a bisexual individual, and that the couple had a swinging lifestyle that included an exciting sexual life. It was his assertion that Irina had gone too far with their open connection, and he extended an invitation to Rasputin to join them. And what about this? He was under the impression that she was suffering from a sexual addiction. She was in need of Rasputin's assistance in order to heal the demons that were residing within her. Yusupov arranged a meeting with 2 of his fellow conspirators after he had successfully gained Rasputin's trust. He was going to be murdered, according to their plans. The men took Rasputin into a basement dining room after picking him up in a car and driving him to the mansion where they were making use of the mansion. When the table was set up, it gave the impression that they had just finished hosting a large party. He was informed that Irina was present with our visitors on the upper floor, and that she would return to the lower floor at a later time to do her healing ceremony. In the meantime, they urged him to consume some food and drink as they waited for her. After taking this into consideration, they began to provide him with miniature cakes and glasses of wine. Rasputin was completely unaware that every single item of food and drink was contaminated with cyanide. Yusupov was unable to accept this information after 2.5 hours had passed. Rasputin had not yet passed away at that point. As time went on, he started to accept the stories that he actually did possess demonic powers, and that poison would not be sufficient to kill him either. After hurriedly ascending the steps, he retrieved his pistol and then went back down to the basement, where he pointed the weapon at Rasputin. That was all the monk did. He just stood there and stared straight ahead. He did not exhibit any signs of terror or appear to be pleading for his life. He fired a shot at Rasputin, causing him to collapse to the ground. As soon as they were done cheering, the men hurried upstairs to celebrate. Yusupov started to get a growing sensation of dread after the celebration had been going on for some time. Together with the physician, he made his way down to the basement and leaned in to check for the presence of a heartbeat. The eyes of Rasputin opened, and he surged aggressively at you. At that very moment, a few of the physicians passed out. As soon as Yusupov shoved the demon away from him, he hurriedly made his way upstairs to inform his friends that Rasputin had been brought back to life. As soon as they reached the basement, he was no longer there. He was making his way across the courtyard after having crawled up the stairs leading to the basement to get there. After Yusupov had shot him in the head with a bullet that hit him square in the head, 5 other men got out their revolvers and began shooting him in the body. The body of Rasputin was placed in the trunk of a car, and then it was taken to a river, where it was buried in a hole in the ice. When Rasputin's body was discovered later, an investigation was conducted. His hands were raised, giving the impression that he was trying to break free of the ice by pressing against it. Even after everything that had happened, there was water in his lungs, which indicated that he was still breathing with some intensity. It was after hearing the account that people came to the conclusion that he had, in fact, returned to life as a zombie. As a matter of fact, they dug up his body and destroyed the remains, but not before they severed his famed penis and preserved it. Indeed, it is currently being shown in a museum in the city of St. Petersburg. Almost immediately after Rasputin's passing, the prophecy that he had made came alive. During the Bolshevik Revolution, the entire Romanov family was put to death, and Russia would never be the same again after that.